Our keynote address today will be given by Raymond Reyes, who will be speaking on the contribution of Native Americans in 20th century America. Mr. Reyes, a Native American, has spent many years working towards better cross-cultural communication. He has been involved with many service organizations and has developed nearly 100 publications and presentations since 1982. Mr. Reyes is a past Chief Administrative Officer for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe and was the Administrative Officer for the American Indian Community Center in Spokane. He has 20 years teaching experience in Indian education, and he is now the Associate Vice President for Diversity at Gonzaga University. Please help me welcome Mr. Reyes.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay. A long, long time ago, when our first mother, the Earth Mother, was young, it was a time when the human people and the plant people and the animal people and the stone people could talk to each other. It's a time when there was a little girl and her name was Ayayish. And Ayayish was an interesting little girl because day after day, all day long, when other children her age were helping their aunties and their grandmas and their uncles prepare for the winter, not Ayayish. What she did was she sat underneath this cedar tree day after day watching life go by. When other children Ayayish's age were out helping their older brothers tan the hides and prepare for clothing for the winter, not Ayayish. Day after day, all day long, she sat underneath that big cedar tree. When other children Ayayish's age were out helping their bigger sisters and their cousins pick bitterroot and camas and get the rest of the berries that were left, not Ayayish. Day after day, all day long, she sat underneath this big cedar tree. Finally, one day, the cedar tree was getting pretty frustrated. Patience could go only so far. "You're so Ayayish." The little girl looks up at the cedar tree. "What do you mean? Look at you. Get up, do something." "I don't know what to do. I don't know anything to do." "You're so Ayayish," Cedar says. "Get up, I'm going to show you how to do something." So Cedar Tree bends down and goes into the Earth Mother and pulls out a handful of moist, cool cedar roots and says, "Now watch, I'm going to show you how to do something." And Cedar Tree began using those roots, circle upon circle, fashioning a beautiful, beautiful basket. You try it. Ayayish did the same thing. And some of you know these baskets were so well crafted that they could hold water and be used for cooking. In the old days, they'd get volcanic rock, lava rock, and heat them up, and then put water in these baskets. And these baskets were so well crafted and engineered that they would hold water and then put the hot rocks in the water to be used for soups and other things. So Ayayish was feeling pretty good, you know? Whenever you can do something, you feel pretty good. So she started making all these baskets. I mean, just really getting into it. Feeling pretty good, getting that peacock walk going on, you know? Cedar Tree had a way of humbling her a bit and said, "You're not done. You're not done." "What do you mean?" "They're naked baskets. They need to have a design or a pattern on them." "But I don't know any designs or any patterns." "You're so Ayayish. Get up, go for a walk, look around, keep your heart open, keep your eyes open, and you'll see patterns, you'll see designs, and you put them in your basket." So Ayayish goes for a walk, and she walks, and she walks. And it's getting late, and she's tired, and she's starting to get grumpy and starting to whine and snivel. She starts to cry, and all of a sudden, she hears this, "Watch where you're walking!" And she jumps startled on the path, and there's a rattlesnake in the middle of the path. "Watch where you're going. And anyway, why are you crying, little girl?" She wipes the tears out of her eyes and says, I got all these baskets, and I'm looking for patterns and designs, and they won't be done until I find something, and I can't find anything, and I don't know what I'm looking for. And Rattlesnake says, "You're so Aya-ish. Look at me. Look at me. What do you see?" Rattlesnake gets up, stands up. On the chest, sees beautiful diamond patterns. Rattlesnake says, "Take them. They're yours." She puts them on the basket. She soon realizes that everything can't always look the same, so then she starts getting frustrated again, walks again. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version on this in the interest of time, okay? Anyway, she keeps on walking and walking and walking and walking, and then all of a sudden she hears this voice, because she's sniveling and crying again, of course, and "Little girl, what's wrong?" She looks up in the distance, and it's Mountain. Mountain's talking to her. So she tells Mountain her dilemma and says, Rattlesnake was really cool, gave me this design, but I need something else. "Look at me, what do you see?" And she looks at Mountain, and she sees triangles, the shape of the way the mountain range is. Mountain says, "Take them, they're yours." She puts them on her basket. So she goes on and on and on, and she sees the glance of lightning. She sees salmon people and gets the design on the side of the salmon. She sees clouds, she sees butterflies, she sees all the things in the Earth Mother. She goes back. She has an abundant number of baskets, all with diverse designs, all those that have been contributed to her naked basket. And she goes back to her village, and she's not Aya-ish anymore. This Aya-ish story comes, it was first told to me about 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago, by Terry Tafoya. And as I understand it, it's a story that comes from the Warm Springs and from the Yakima area. But I think it's also a story that describes the context in which I want to address the notion of contributions of Native Americans in 20th century America. Like Aya-ish, I could take you on an Australian walkabout of the last century and truly identify an impeccable list of contributions. In many cases, check this out, contributions from past centuries that were not fully realized until the 20th century. For example, I could chant the Jack Weatherford mantra and rap the litany of such contributions. As many of you probably know, Mr. Weatherford wrote the book Indian Givers, How Indians of the Americas Transformed the World. He and numerous other scholars have vividly documented the contributions of Indian people to our federal system of government, our democratic institutions, modern medicine, agriculture, architecture, psychology, religion, ecology. For example, many of you probably know this, that 75% of all the pharmaceuticals that we use today come from either natural or synthetic derivatives from many botanicals that tribal societies knew about. approximately 60% of all the foods eaten in the world today were first harvested by Indians of the Americas. Food used by Indian people such as potatoes and chocolate and chilies. Yes, chocolate. I'm a chocoholic. Revolutionize the food patterns in Europe and Asia. The list of Aboriginal crops eventually introduced to the, quote, civilized, unquote, world is long. Corn, pumpkins, squash, zucchini, cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, sweet potatoes, tapioca, peanuts, chewing gum, pole beans, on and on and on. For hundreds of years, for example, prior to Freud and Jung and Pearls and Rogers, tribal societies had a highly sophisticated knowledge system of dreams, narrative expression, health and wellness as it pertained to mental health. Like Aya-ish, I could identify, describe, and behold these contributions as the pattern and design of the contribution of Native Americans to 20th century America. However, what I want to do this afternoon, and what I want to explore with you this afternoon, is the container, the naked basket in the Aya-ish story. What does the basket symbolize? Let's examine the question and perhaps discover the true nature of Native America's contribution to the 20th century. In doing so, I hope to reveal what one of my mentors, Carlos Cortez, once said. He said, there are a lot of BFOs. Incidentally, he's a historian. And he says he's really a Bacchist, because what he likes to do is go back in the time continuum and look forward to be able to see the patterns and designs. So BFOs for him are blinding flashes of the obvious. And what I want to do is for me share to you what I think the BFOs are, the blinding flashes of the obvious, in terms of what the basket symbolizes to answer this question. Because I think that this question, the answer to this question, truly is Indian country's contribution to the 20th century, and I will hopefully prove to you by the time my time is up that also the contribution for this century as we sit and stand. So what is the question? Here's the question. What does it mean to be human? The symbol of the naked basket is this question, not the ornamentation. What does it mean to be human? The answer to the question is the contribution. So let me explain that a couple of ways. First, obviously, I've got to tell another story, all right? Because that's the way I make sense of the world, and that's the way I learn. What does it mean to be human? Not food, not medicine, not the Iroquois Six Nations and informing Thomas Paine that he wrote in Common Sense that what Benjamin Franklin learned in terms of our current federal state of government. Not all those things I talked about. But the question, what does it mean to be human? I have a young boy named Christopher. And years ago, when he was about 3 years old, I live out north of Deer Park. A friend of mine helped me build a sweat lodge because I adopted Christopher when he was very young, and he's enrolled Northern Cheyenne from Lame Deer, Montana. And I didn't want to deal in pan-Indianism. I want and still to this day want him to learn his tribal ways. So I had a friend here in Spokane, some of you might know him, Clayton Small, and he's also Northern Cheyenne, and he taught me how to build that sweat lodge the way the Northern Cheyenne people do. The prayers, the songs, how to run it the way they do, everything. And so Christopher is starting to go in the sweat lodge on a regular basis. At that time, in those days, we were sweating at least once a week when Clayton was around. And Christopher would go in there with all my friends, all males. We'd go in there and sweat. And one day, we went for a walk. Where I walk about a half mile from where I live, there's a creek. And we used to go down there, and still do occasionally, because at that time, there was this turtle that used to live down there. And Christopher and I used to go down by the creek and kind of sneak up on Turtle because we want to check him out and see when he had his head out and his legs out. And we used to like, especially his little legs were kind of cute. We used to really like to hang out. So anyway, one day we went down and checked out Turtle, and we startled Turtle. Turtle did his thing, and then we were walking back home. And as we were walking back home, we're holding hands. He must be, at this time, he must be about 4. We're walking, and all of a sudden across the street, we're going up a hill, and across the street, he sees this tree. And you've seen these trees before where it's a big trunk, and then out of one trunk comes 2 trees? Just nod your head. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, okay, great. I know it's lunchtime, and you're saying, okay, anyway. He goes, Daddy, look at that tree. And the tree had been obviously hit by lightning. And half of it was on the ground, and the other half still standing was charred and black. You could see it. So he goes, that tree's got owie, Daddy. Let's go make it feel better. I thought, this ought to be interesting, So he's now the leader, and he's pulling me on the other side of the street. We're going across the street, stand in front of the tree, and stand there for a while. And I'm waiting for my cue. I mean, he's going to tell us how we're going to, make sure this owie goes away for this tree. So he goes, Daddy, let's sing to the tree. I'm wondering, what song are we going to sing? He starts singing in his own way one of those Sweat Lodge songs. So I chime in with him, and we sing for a while. And then he goes up to the tree, and he hugs the tree. He looks up at me and says, it's going to be okay now, Daddy. And we walk away. Now, what does this have to do with answering the question? what does it mean to be human? What does this have to do with talking about the contributions of Native America to the 20th century? For me, what Christopher taught me is really what culture is. And I take it off of Angeles Arian, who is a cross-cultural psychologist that has written The Fourfold Way. And she talks about how culture is a way of life that allows us to walk the spiritual path with practical feet. Let me say that again. Because you can take an anthropological, a sociological, theological, all the ologies in terms of defining what culture is. But what she simply says is culture is a way of life that allows us to walk the spiritual path with practical feet. And that's what Christopher was doing. He was exporting the essence, the ethos, the totality of what he knows happens in a sweat lodge. That when he goes in there and certain things happen, certain things are said, certain things are sung, done, that when he walks out, he feels better, he feels good. So he felt, hey, I could generalize and take this from one context, put it in another context, and maybe it will do the same thing and contribute in the same venue to this tree. Ayayish basket is a symbol of that way of life and its relationship to all things. What does it mean to be human? Thomas Berry once said, quote, "The universe is composed of subjects to be communed with, not objects to be exploited. Everything has its own voice." He went on to say that somehow we have become autistic. Would we live differently if we listen to the voices of the species we are causing to go extinct? How do we remember how to listen? Ayayish's basket gives us literally and figuratively to the root of this issue. Both Thomas Aquinas and Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, in different ways saw the world as saturated with God's active presence. Now, remember, they were not radical realists. They were radical realists, not romantics. So they didn't have their, if they had their head in the clouds, they also had their feet on the ground. Indian people related to their first mother, the earth mother, as subject and not object. Hence, all persons, places, and things are and were holy. The presupposition to such a relationship is that abundance and interdependent cooperation was the operative instead of scarcity and fearful competition. Moreover, the desire as well as the need to learn from these relations was ever present and strong. Let me give you an example. Vine Deloria, who wrote Custer Died for Your Sins and God is Red and numerous other articles and books. In fact, he's one of my heroes, one of my role models. I actually went to the University of Colorado in Boulder one time and went up to his door and touched the doorknob. He wasn't there. The door was closed. He didn't have office hours the day and the time that I happened to be there. Vine Deloria talks about how some information concerning how to live comes from direct observation. Not only learning about phenomena, learning about nature, but learning from. And he gives a good example that he got from Standing Bear. And I want to share that with you because I think it brings home this sense of what I'm trying to talk about in terms of what does it mean to be human. And not to say that Indian people are eco-saints, okay? That's the stereotype. Years ago, 20 years ago, there was a commercial, and it had this Indian standing on top of the cliff, and he had a little tear going down his cheek as he looked at the ravage that was being done on the Earth Mother. Do you remember that? To suggest that Indian people are eco-saints. I'm not suggesting that, okay? I'm not a romantic when it comes to that. I'm a rational realist, like Thomas Aquinas and Ignatius Loyola. But let me tell you what Standing Bear taught Vine Deloria. He talks about a time when Indian people learned that gophers and other small animals cached their food for the winter. He says that their women knew the likely places of these caches, usually near low banks and went hunting for them with long, sharp-pointed sticks. They would poke in the ground until they came to a soft spot on the earth, and there, 10 or 12 inches below the surface, they carefully uncovered fine, dry, shredded grass. And underneath that would be a nice lot of vegetables lying in a heap as fresh as when they were gathered. Some of these caches would be 3 feet in diameter and would hold as much as one person could carry. Now, I suppose, as Vine once said, that it's not good public relations to recount how the Indians used to rip off and steal from the Gophers, but this is a bit of information we can derive 2 things from. First, that Indian people had knowledge of the natural world necessary to sustain themselves in despite of any misfortune that might befall them. Thus, a person lost in the prairie couldn't starve because of this knowledge. It is interesting that the freedom involved, but also the responsibility for our own existence. Very quickly, as a side note, I had a friend recently tell me, Raymond, it's quite interesting that some time ago, this culture, this continent, this time, this place had at the beginning this thing called the Statue of Liberty as its symbol. What is a symbol? A symbol is a psychological mechanism to transform energy. So we have this Statue of Liberty, and certainly we are freedom lovers. We are different in this country. We disagree with a lot of things, but we agree with one thing, like John Stuart Mill on Liberty says, the absence of restraint is what we are seduced by. We love freedom. But freedom without responsibility is spiritual bankruptcy. What we see when we see children killing children, when we see the moral decay going on in this country today, is spiritual bankruptcy. Freedom, yes, we are freedom lovers. Whether you are on the extreme right conservative end of the political spectrum or whether you are a blue dog Democrat, we love freedom in this country. Now, like our friends of the past, our tribal people, there is the responsibility part. It's been suggested that perhaps for the last several hundreds of years we've had the Statue of Liberty as our symbol of who we are. Maybe, and that was on the East Coast. And as we steamrolled over and over and over and over to the west, the westward expansion, the good, the bad, and the ugly of defining this country. Maybe on the West Coast what we need is a statue of responsibility to carry us for the next several hundred years. So we can be conscious, intentional custodians of that gift called freedom. Because we have forgotten that. We have forgotten that. But Indian people did not forget that. What is that naked basket? Let's remember the question. What is the question? What does it mean to be a human being? They learned from the animals. They didn't learn about, they learned from. There's an equity, a certain balance to a relationship that says it's mutual and I can learn from. Here again, not being autistic. Hear the voices that have just as legitimate right to be here as you and I. Remember our question in the symbol of the basket again. I'm relentless about this. Can you tell I'm a teacher? What does it mean to be human? The journey of Native America through the 20th century is a powerful case study of human resiliency. So this is another dimension of what the contribution has been. The nature of this resiliency is a dimension of what it means to be human. Look at some of the dominant footprints of this journey. Indian people entering the 20th century as survivors of the American Holocaust. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget, depending on who you read and believe, at the beginning of time, and not to feel guilty, blame, or in any way victimized, to remember that people say there was as little as 5 million Indian people and as much as 30 to 50 million Indian people living on North American continent pre-Columbian contact. And at one low point, there was, 225,000 Indian people? Out of 5 million or 20 or 30 million? So we did have an American Holocaust here, especially when you think about the extermination policies that the federal government had. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about how we entered as survivors into this century, this last century, the 20th century. The Indian was granted U.S. citizenship in 1924. So 25 years approximately into the new century, the government granted Indian people U.S. citizenship. I don't know whether that's a cosmic joke or what, but indeed that is what happened. The Indian Relocation Act of 1934 became the seeds of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. The same decade, the Johnson-O'Malley Act was the midwife of contemporary Indian education, a field that I've spent the last over 20 years of my life in. The Indian Relocation Act in 1952 was a significant speed bump on the path to self-determination. In 1988, this is interesting, almost three-fourths of the way into this century, the 20th century, check this out, this is cool, this is interesting. Not cool, it's interesting. In 1988, Congress passes the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Hello? Despite experiencing the federal policies in the 20th century, Native people, Indian people, tribal people are living examples of being human, being resilient. What are the elements of human resiliency? Let me just briefly talk about that a bit. Because I think that here again, this is what that basket is about, not the ornamentation, not the things that rattlesnake gave, or the thing that mountain gave, or that salmon gave. What is this basket? What is it? Resiliency. That's the gift. That's the contribution to all people from all four directions. Elements of human resiliency, a sense of belongingness, strong community identity. You can see that in Indian country. Wherever you go, whether it's the powwow circuit, whether you go to conferences, wherever you go, there's strong community identity. You see this with the Coeur d'Alene tribe. You see this with a lot of the area tribes. 10 tribes within a 200-mile radius. That's the chant of the Chamber of Commerce these days. 10 tribes within a 200-mile radius of Spokane, Washington. Hey. Well, what you got there is a sense of belongingness, you know? You got a sense of belongingness. Purpose, a sense of purpose is another dimension of resiliency. I think tribal people had a sense of purpose. Culture. I think Christopher's lesson to me about culture as a way of life that allows us to walk the spiritual path with practical feet is a strong, coherent sense of purpose. What is the purpose of life? To experience. What is the purpose of life? To be in balance with all your relatives. So, sense of belongingness, a sense of purpose, a sense of hope is another feature, another artifact of this thing called resiliency that I think also is a contribution to the 20th century. Sense of hope, thinking 7 generations removed. With the things I do now, I'm thinking into the future. I have a sense of hope. How many of us plan our lives that way, beyond the parameters and boundaries of our lived experience? Sense of hope. And there's more to that, but sense of power is another feature of resiliency. When you look at kids killing kids, or these gangbangers, or all this stuff that's going on right now, you know, it's the cry of soul, because, you know, you got to remember that most adolescents are existential philosophers. And what they want is to be a rebel with a cause. They want a sense of belongingness. They want a sense of purpose. They want a sense of hope. And they want a sense of power. And what I'm suggesting to you is that Indian people were resilient people because they had all these things in their culture, despite the American Holocaust on this turtle island. Sense of power is a self-efficacy, knowing that you have that freedom and that liberty to do and control what happens to you. You are spiritually sovereign. Sense of power. A sense of uniqueness. Pride and humility. The sense of uniqueness that comes from your language, your ceremonies, your songs, your stories, your dances, sacred as well as social. Uniqueness. So not only is there a group identity, but there's this novel part too, that is both a source of pride, but also a reminder of humility. So uniqueness, power, hope, belongingness, and purpose. These are the hallmarks of resiliency. Being resilient is being human. What is the question? What does it mean to be human? Being human is being in a community and having common unity. Larry McNeil, who has been influenced by people like Saul Alinsky, who wrote a book in '72, Rules for Radicals, also was very involved during the 60s, and actually Malcolm X and Martin Luther King consulted with Saul Alinsky and how do you create sustainable social change. But this is what McNeil says are the three central functions of mediating institutions. And mediating institutions are like churches, synagogues, schools, unions, service and interest clubs, neighborhood associations. But he says all mediating institutions function in three ways. They help engage their members in sharing their story, their sacred story. To talk and listen to each other. They help their members understand the meaning making, the meaning of their stories in the context of the larger world, and what is the value to their tradition. So one is a place where I can tell my story, where I can, it's like Cheers. I can go someplace where everybody knows my name, But not only I can tell my story, but I can also have help in fellowship with sense-making what that story is to a larger context. Who am I? Where am I going? Do I have anything to declare type thing. And the third thing is they help organize their members for action in the spirit of the Hebrew word tukum, to repair or heal the world. So it's not about us, but it's that sense of altruism to give back to the circle. So what I'm suggesting to you is the very essence, ethos, nature of tribal life was a mediating institution. The kinship system, language constructs, oral tradition, the relationship to the earth, all clearly address McNeil's three central functions of a mediating institution. I want to read something to you that touched me late last night as I was busily preparing for this time. And I came across something that I cut out of the newspaper back in December 25th, 1999. Last Christmas. And what it was the editorials board season greetings to its readership. And it's something that Jeannie Givens wrote. Many of you might know. Coeur d'Alene member, former Idaho state representative, and journalist. Whoa, oh, okay, whoa, wow. I better do this right, huh? And she wrote this, and I tell you what, I just started crying when I read this. I just started crying. Thank you, Jeannie. You just open, and I want to read this because what it does is it synthesizes what I'm telling you. What does it mean to be human? Resiliency. The features of a mediating institution. Not being autistic. Not beyond being an echo saint. This is what she wrote. This is Christmas, 1999. And what it is little vignettes that all the editorial board have written. Okay, there's a column. Quote, I like knowing that under this same gray winter sky over 100 years ago, canoes crossed Lake Coeur d'Alene, launching from headwaters, now North Idaho College. 10 canoes paddled to the mouth of the Coeur d'Alene River. Joining other Coeur d'Alene families, they would become 20 canoes, paddling slowly in unison for 3 days. To Cataldo Mission for Christmas services. Bracing cold did not diminish the joy of being together. Unquote. You see it? Do you feel it? Do you know it? What does it mean to be human? To be mindful of the active presence in all things. To be resilient. To be community. What was the Native American contribution to the 20th century? Was it the federal government structure that we have? Was it food? Was it medicine? Was it architecture? Was it ecology? Was it sociology? Was it psychology? Yes! But more than that, that is the ornamentation. Modeling the answer to the question, what does it mean to be human, is the contribution. Recently, I read a piece by Jean Houston. It was entitled, Dynamic Unfolding of What We Are. In this essay, Dr. Houston describes an experience when she was 8 years old, and she met Helen Keller. She begins her recollection of this precious childhood memory when a quote from Helen Keller, she says this, quote, she says, this is Helen Keller talking, for the first 6 years of my life, I had no concept whatsoever. No concept. I was imprisoned in my deafness, my dumbness, and my blindness. Finally, my teacher went to the pump house and pumped a cool something in one hand. And in the other, she spelled out W-A-T-E-R. 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 I stood still, my whole body frozen. Suddenly understood that cool, clear something the teacher was pumping in one hand meant what she was tapping in the other. And at that instant, my mind woke up. That word water dropped in my mind like the sun in a frozen winter world. And I learned the name of 30 different things before the end of that day. It was my mental awakening. As you are well aware, Helen Keller went on to become a great midwife of souls, a world-class educator, a friend, an inspiration for many people. I have seen Native America create mental awakenings for all people on Turtle Island. Tribal societies are a warm, nurturing sun in a frozen, barren world. It is creativity and passion that are contagious as we search for what does it mean to be human. Or as Dr. Frederick Frank once observed, to be human against all odds. Could the meaning of being born human be to become human? In his provocative and challenging book, A is for Ox, intellectual historian Barry Sanders urges the rediscovery of story as a way of recapturing our humanity in a world dominated by electronic images. This is what he says. How does one come to feel confident and strong? The process is obviously a long and complicated one, different for each person. But the first steps come out of thin air, the human voice. Speaking sentences to another human being, listening for a response, marshaling thoughts in order to respond again and on, encourages a person to care about other people, to pay attention to their story, their sacred story, to weave their story into our own. It generates trust. In exchange of stories, hope arises. As the poet Robert Browning writes, that the other will rap and knock and enter in our soul. When the door opens, we pray that someone interesting is at home. But the self, that instrument of reflective subjectivity and human coherence, humane coherence, that modern society assumes as its ultimate experiential and moral reference point, cannot and should not be taken for granted. With a literacy based on fully experienced oral tradition, the self remains a psychological and social impossibility. Native Americans' contributions in the 20th century is preserving the possibility of such literacy. Stand up real quickly. I want to tattoo something in your consciousness. Just stand up. What is that? I'm recovering from a cold, so, I got a snot full of head, or head full of snot, or whatever. Was that politically correct, or what a scholar would say? Put your hand on your head like this. And say this. To know. You're probably strangers. I don't know if you know each other, so hug yourself. And hug yourself. Rock yourself. Do this. To care. My name is Raymond Reyes, and RR, sometimes people call me Roadrunner because I also like to run. But what you want to do is assume the position of the Roadrunner and go like this and say to act. Come on, you got to participate. Come on now. I'm giving you permission to act your shoe size and not your age. Yes, thank you. Okay, here we go. Let's put it together. To know, to care, to act. All right. That is the literacy of what the Indian people have given. Go ahead and sit down. To know what? To know the power. These are the 3 R's. The traditional 3 R's are reading, writing, arithmetic. The 3 R's I'm proposing to you are the 3 R's of multicultural competency, or the 3 R's that I am trying to tell you are about answering this question, what does it mean to be human? To know the power of relationship. To know here's the first R, relationship. To know the power of relationship. Relationship to what? Relationship to self. Know self. We had ceremonies. We had rites of passages that activated deep in our psyche what we were meant to do, what we are called to do. Vision quest, which has got part of the pop culture's mystified sense of what Indian people are about. But in essence, that was go back to resiliency, that sense of purpose. To know the power of relationship to self, and that's not enough, to know the power of relationship to the other, whoever the other is. Who's who in the hood? The other, to be other-centered. And it's not enough, it's not a checkup from the neck up. It's not enough to know self and know the other. You must do something with that. And you must care about what you know. And here's the second R. You must care about what you know and make it relevant. Common ground, common ground, common ground for the common good. And it's not enough because there's a lot of bleeding heart liberals that just stay at home and send money and lick their stamp and, like Teflon, nothing sticks to them. But you must act upon what you care about out of respect. Relationship, relevance, and respect. Frederick, I won't go there. I don't have the time. Okay. Felix Cohen, often referred to as the father of Indian federal law, uses the miner's canary metaphor to define the importance of Native America's sacred story, its lived experience to American democracy. This is what Felix Cohen says. The Indian plays much the same role in our American society that the Jews played in Germany. Like the miner's canary, the Indian marks the shift from fresh air to poison gas in our political atmosphere. And our treatment of Indians, even more than our treatment of other minorities, marks the rise and fall of our democratic faith. Native America continues to live, grow, and prosper. Native America is a living testimony to the resilient nature of its indigenous soul. From 1492 to the year 2000, American Indian people have fought the poison gas of a political context, unable to deal with the social justice issues surrounding race and religion, among other things. Native America's contribution to the 20th century is its unique and beautiful racial identity and its deep love for finding God in all things. As Pedro Arrupe, the former general of the Society of Jesus, once said, quote, "Nothing is more practical than finding God. That is falling in love in a quiet, absolute, final way." What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide who will go where. It will decide who will get out of bed in the morning, what you will do with your evenings, how will you spend your weekends, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. Unquote. Native America has been and continues to be deeply in love with the answer to the question, what does it mean to be human? This is Native America's gift to you in the last century, and I would suggest for us in this century. Peot Nama. In the spirit of our ancestors, may the blessings be. All good things come from the forces of goodness. Make it so. Thank you very much for listening to me, for being here today. God bless you. Do we have time for questions or no? Or
Actually, yeah.
we got to get out of here? Or? Okay.
Unfortunately, thank you so much. It was a wonderful speech. Right now, 1 o'clock is the panel over in the Lake Coeur d'Alene room of the Student Union building, so we'll see you over there. Thank you very much for coming.